All right, so I think we are ready to move on to the highlight of our day, which is always our program. So Jean, I'm going to let you come up and introduce our special guest.
Well, I'm really excited today to hear my friend Tobias Guzman speak with us. I've known Tobias for years. We were at UNC together, and he remembers that when he was a student there, that he met me when I gave a welcome to some event. And I gave lots of welcomes, so who knows what that was for, right? But then in 2000, he came back and was working at UNC. And he had, for many years, he worked in residence life and dining. And then he just kept progressing up the ladder. He got his doctorate. And now he is the first, or the inaugural, Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at UNC. And in talking with him, we thought that might be interesting for him to talk a little bit more about what that really means to people. That's why the title of the program is Beyond Cinco de Mayo. Also, he is he has a unique quality that I don't know anyone else has. In addition to always matching his ties and his socks. But in addition to that, guess what it is if I would say he's almost a teenager? Well, February 29th. Right, leap year.
Okay.
He's the only person I know that was born on leap year. But so he'll be a teenager pretty soon. I think that's fun. So I'm really excited that you're with us, Tobias, and I know they'll be open for questions afterwards. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I am not a podium person, so this is a challenge for me. I like to be moving in and out. So if I start to move, just know that that's my natural desire. And to our online folks, I apologize if I step out a little bit. But yes, so Dean Jean, I affectionately still call her Dean Jean, when we met was quite some time ago. She used to do conduct, and I just want to make sure y'all know that I was not in her office because of any conduct violation. It was for other reasons, but anyway. So thank you so much for having me. You know, this is a conversation that I think is happening across our nation. And it's regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. And my approach to talking about this is one that I know that everyone is at different levels of understanding what it is. I also know that not everyone is at a perfection level, including myself. And that it's kind of this fluidity of understanding these concepts and understanding what really is the heart of this, and that's people. And I was very, very intrigued by Rudy's statements at the very beginning, because it is a topic that I talked to 50 football players in Fort Collins last night. 50 football players, high schoolers, and I talked to them about love. And I said, how many times do you say, I love you to each other? They looked at me like I was crazy. And of course, some things came out like, well, I'm not gay. Like, tell me more about that. What do you mean? And I said, you mean that you associate love with being romantic? And they're like, well, yeah. So are you always romantic with your mom? No. The point of it is that we need to love each other more. And there's a thing called male toxicity, where we tend to, as males, we don't like to say I love you because it kind of hurts our maleness. But what if we got away from that and just naturally would say I love you to one another? I have a football player, another football player who graduated from UNC about 4 years ago, who texts me every Monday and says, Dr. Tobias, have a wonderful week, hope you have a good week, whatever it is. And he always ends it with, love you. My point is that this is difficult work that we're all kind of managing and trying to navigate through. And that is working through our human relations. And we also have biases. And I know that the biases come up because we're socialized to think certain ways. Here's a good example of how we're socialized. We are born and immediately, I'm not sure if they do it right now, but we immediately are categorized as male with a blue blanket, blue hat, and female with a pink hat or pink blanket. That's called socialization. We start to get the images and we start to get the cues of what our identity is. We see commercials and there are female and male roles. In our households, I grew up in a very traditional Mexican-American household, and the males worked and the females stayed at home. That's called socialization. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm saying that's just how we grow up. Now let's talk about how we are socialized in terms of our own identities. And our identities could be from our race, our ethnicity, our sexual orientation, our gender. All of those things are our socialization. And so when I think about having this conversation, I wanted to make sure that you understood my approach, and that is always coming from a place of seeking to understand and love. I'm not into someone saying something that's maybe a misstep and clobbering them, because what I know that what that does is that tells you, don't go there, don't bring it up, and the least amount of times that we have to encounter is that you feel uncomfortable talking with someone else. Someone says, well, I'm colorblind, I love all people. And I would say, it's okay to say that you see my color. You can say that I want you to know that it's okay to see that I am a brown person, that I am a Mexican, a Latino, because that is honoring who I am. And being colorblind is somewhat discounting the fact of that part of my identity. So I'm going to get to now these terms and what they all mean. What button do I push? Oh, the mouse. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Was eating.
So here's some terminology. First one is diversity. Second one is equity. Third is inclusion. And the final one being belonging. And these are not the only terms one should know, but these are just important ones. So here's an example of diversity. You don't need to read the spreadsheet, it's just there for visual effects. But diversity, here's the definition. A description or categorization of differences, usually based on, on identities such as race, gender, ability, etc. So essentially that spreadsheet shows this is a count. So when everybody says, well, I want us to be more diverse, I want to have a Rotarian membership that is more diverse. That is essentially saying how many people fall into these categories do we have? Okay, that's diversity. Equity. This is what you're starting to probably hear more so of. And this is a perfect graphic in terms of defining equity. In this first graph, where every individual is on the same two-ply block, that is equity. Everyone is standing on the same height. But we also have some inequity there. The smallest person on there still probably can't see over the fence. And so when we say, I want equity, what we're saying is that everyone gets the same resources that they possibly can, but everyone still stays at the same level. When you look at the graph closest to me, we call that equity. And equity, did I say equity? Sorry, equality, I apologize. Equality is on that side. Equity is on this side. When we talk about equity, we're saying the top individual there probably doesn't need additional resources. So we're not going to give them additional resources. The second individual is going to need a little bit more, and the third individual is going to need a little bit more. That's what we call equity. Here's another example that I think sometimes is also helpful to see, and this is what I work with in education. Equality on the other side is that everyone has a ladder and they're achieving equality by all having the ability to climb that ladder and get that diploma. But if we think of our world in this way, we're forgetting the fact that not everyone is born into the same situation, and that there are going to be some differences in climbing that ladder. When I think about the funding of our schools, not every school or district is funded the same way. And so there are challenges. I think we've seen that in our own District 6, and Dr. Pilch has done an incredible job of funding and going out to taxpayers and saying, we need more schools. Again, this is not political, and I'm not trying to get there at all. I'm just saying, here's some facts. And the facts are is that our schools in District 6 in Greeley needed extra help. And so whether that is poor funding, whether that is someone who has resources to be able to get extra tutors or extra help, they're able to climb that ladder a little bit more, a little easier. And that's what we have in terms of all of our, in all of our lives, is that we tend to be at different levels. And so that's why when I talk about equality and giving the same amount to everyone, sometimes is not always going to be where we want to try to achieve, because we're going to have some gaps. Sometimes those rungs on that ladder are not as working as well. They're not as sturdy. The next phrase, or the next definition is for inclusion. And it's what you do with diversity to ensure individuals have the opportunity to fully participate in decision-making processes. We see this all the time in terms of decisions in corporations, in organizations. And sometimes there are certain groups of people that have the ability to make decisions. And you start to see more and more now people saying, we want to have a voice. And inclusion intentionally promotes a sense of belonging where the inherent worth and dignity of all people are recognized, and it leverages the abilities, unique qualities, and perspectives of each individual. So I like to use those little bubbles over there, and the bubbles first show exclusion, and you see all the I'm going to call them marbles, colorful marbles that are outside of the inner parts. And that we can see that very clearly as being exclusion. The next big bubble shows that there's integration. All the blue marbles are still there collectively, but we have now all those colorful marbles still in their same group. We can see that in terms of integration, in terms of housing and schooling, that still does happen. We have segregation, which also sometimes still happens in communities where all those marbles are still separated, but those colorful marbles are not included. They're not even allowed to get into that inner circle of those blue marbles. And when we talk about inclusion, we're talking about all those marbles, the blue and the colorful marbles being next to each other. Now, this next part is about belonging. And I could tell that this group has a strong sense of wanting to have members feel included. And you also want to feel like you belong. When I walked in here, I was obviously greeted by Dean Jean. She gave me a nice name tag. That's a wonderful symbolic way of showing inclusion. Also belonging. I could be considered an outsider, and I am because I'm not part of your group. But I at least have a nice little name tag here that makes me feel part of this group, at least for these 30 minutes. Think about the people that we work with. What kinds of things do we do to help them feel like they belong? Have you ever been in a situation, you've gone to to an event and you just felt uncomfortable? You're like, I'd rather be home, or I'd rather just be somewhere else. And it doesn't matter where you're getting that from, it's just the vibe that you get when you enter that space. And I think when we talk about these kinds of things of feeling welcomed, feeling a part of the group, we see that all the time in our churches and our organizations. And I get an opportunity to work with 10,000 students, and I'm an administrator for all the students that go to UNC. It's just not one separate group, it's not one certain identity, but it's for all of our students. And sometimes that is a challenge, because I get lots of different students that come my way who say, I don't feel welcome, I don't feel included. And when you are working at a university where lots of points of view and perspective are welcomed and going back and forth, sometimes it is difficult to manage that. And so I've talked a lot about these feelings and essentially these actions. And what's important is what do we do about that? What steps will you take to essentially help people feel like they're included? So I would even say that diversity is not enough. Because again, remember, diversity is the count. Diversity is saying that Rudy is a Latino, Tobias is a Latino. I don't know anybody else's identities in here, so I'm just gonna pick on us. And that we have two, let's say I'm a member, we have two Latinos here. We're part of those colorful marbles. But how do you make me feel, and how do I make you feel? Because it's always a two-way street. And a lot of times people feel like it's not. And I would say to you that we've got to get to that point where it is a two-way street. It is reciprocal. A lot of the tensions that we see, I'm going to go back to 2020, and you saw an incredible amount of racial reckoning in our world, a lot of different protests. And that was a big turning point, I think, for our nation in terms of what happened, what occurred, and how we treat Black folks in our world. And it's not over, because we do have histories of mistreatment or tension, discrimination, racism. And you can take any other group and identity, sexual orientation, gender. We have a lot of privilege. I explained to our football players yesterday that I possess not white privilege, but male privilege. And they're like, what is male privilege? Are you saying that, all males have male privilege? And I said, yeah, we do. And I asked how many had a sister or a mother or an aunt. Most of them raised their hand. And I said, do you, as a male, have to feel worried, concerned, unsafe when you go out to the parking lot at 9 p.m.? They're like, why? Why would I? Exactly, why would you? But does your little sister have that feeling of looking over their shoulder? That is called privilege. Things that we don't necessarily see as a advantage that we have. I'm pretty confident, 35 years in martial arts, I don't have any ounce of insecurity or feeling unsafe when I go to a poorly lit parking lot. But my 19-year-old daughter does. My wife does. That's privilege. So, just so you know, these kinds of conversations typically are 3.5 hour, 8 hour, 3-day workshops. So I know this is just a little bit of a splash of what is important. I'm also open to any kind of questions that you might have. I know this can also be pretty heavy, and it's not meant to be right now. It's just meant to be a little education, a little awareness, and know that in everything that we're dealing with, this is coming up. Whether it's your church, whether it's your community service organization, a university, your business organization, it's coming up quite a bit in terms of what are you doing for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and as I add, belonging in there. So with all that said, what questions might you have? And if you don't have any, that's perfectly fine. Yes, in the back with the 2 hats. Thousands of resources, and I will send them to Jean, and she will send them out. I've got podcasts, I've got movies, I've got books, and of course, as a person who works at a university, articles. So happy to send that. Okay. There's someone over here. Yes.
My question is more touched on it was, you and I are going to belong or be whatever.
Yes, absolutely. How do you bridge the gap when sometimes you feel like the other party may not feel that they want to be a part of, they want to engage? I think it all depends on the situation. And the situation may be that that person has been in a very, very traumatic, difficult interaction. And it could be with males, it could be with white males, it could be whatever it may be, as an example. And I think sometimes we have to kind of listen to that and find out what is it? What is the barrier that we're not able to talk? Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it's trust. Trust is a big aspect to this. And I don't think that when I meet someone immediately that I trust them. It takes time. And so sometimes it will never connect. But I think our trying could look like, tell me about yourself. Simple things like that. Tell me about yourself. Where'd you grow up? Can I tell you about myself? And sometimes what we don't realize is that we have some commonalities that we don't realize. Just because we may not look alike, we may have some commonalities. And sometimes we've got to figure those out. Okay.
It seems like sometimes when a group of people join in with another group of people, in order to feel safe, they sort of stay together for a while and then they kind of venture out.
Mhm.
It seems to me it's at that point, it's not about trust as much as it is about developing the energy to be willing to risk.
Mm. Ted is wise if you didn't know. It's funny because there was a joke that, how did we know that that was his seat? And I said, it's because there's an apple sitting there. And apple equals wisdom. And we're coming full circle, Ted. What was your question?
Well, you
I forgot.
you talked about the difficulty about trust.
Yeah.
And sometimes when a group stays together, they need to stay together to develop the energy to go risk learning about trust.
Yeah.
And it seems it's almost a comment more than a question, where seeing that group as a person or as people would be to honor the fact that it's going to take them some time to blend in or join us, or for us to join them.
Mhm.
And we can risk first, but it may not be reciprocated.
Yeah, that's very true. What's that?
Comfort zone.
Comfort
So
zones. Yeah. Yeah, we all have our comfort zones, and sometimes we want to allow those comfort zones to be pressed a little bit. And then we all have those times where we're like, I just don't want to go there. I don't want to take that risk. And Dr. Beverly Tatum writes a whole book on this. And I'll put that in the information to send to you. And what she talks about is the phenomena that she's a Black author, and she says, why do all the Black kids sit at the same table in the cafeteria? And I think we all can get that image and understand that there are groups and communities that just gravitate to each other. And I can say that we sometimes will not make someone feel comfortable to come over and approach us when we're all sitting at the same table. And to have that other person who's the part of the out group is that person's taking a huge risk. And I guess that's kind of the crux to what I'm talking about. And that is, how many times do each of us take a risk? That's really what I'm talking about, is your own self-work and your own challenge is, even though it's really super uncomfortable, when do I take those risks? And it's hard. It's not easy. How many times do I go into a place where I am the person that is going to be the only person, or the very, very few of the people in that room? That's hard. Yes.
Yeah, I can repeat, shorten it.
Yeah, so the short version is, the question is, we have just several weeks ago, we had a confirmation of one of the first Black female judges. And the question is how do we square that with the fact that the biggest part of our population, aside from our white demographic, is our Latino and Latina demographic. And I would infer that maybe some of your question is why aren't we seeking out a Latino or Latina judge as well? And why did we potentially have a very specific call to action of seeking out a Black female judge? Because that was really the only requisite in my understanding. Is that a good paraphrasing of your question? And then I said my time was up, so. It's a tough question, but here's what I will say, is that Black, brown, and indigenous peoples in our world are the most oppressed and without as many resources as any other population and identity group. And what astounds me is that we still have to be talking about having the first in our country, the first and then fill in the blank. And I don't necessarily, I get frustrated with that myself. And we still have not had a female president of the United States. Why is that? And I think that's where this conversation could go next, is talking about systems and how historically systems prevent that. And that's a pretty deep conversation, and definitely not at a podium, because I think there's some activities and other kinds of things, but we are working in a system, and the system is pretty entrenched. So that doesn't really answer your question, but I'm gonna give it some more thought. What's that?
We're on the same page.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for your attention. I also recognize that the things that I've said could conjure up some things for you where you're like, I don't know about that, Tobias. I gotta ask him or challenge him on that, and that's perfectly fine. I work at the university. You can easily find me. Dean Jean knows my email address, phone number. I'd love to have coffee, especially if Ted's paying for it. And that's how we build relationships. And so I really do appreciate it if there's an opportunity that you would like to sit and talk about that. Remember, my approach is not to clobber, it's to seek to understand and for us to have a conversation. So I want to thank Dean Jean, all of you, President, to invite me here today, and thank you so much.